Imagine this. You walk into a luxury hotel after a long flight. Your mind's set on relaxation. You're tired, but excited to finally unwind. You head to the front desk, ready to check in and get to your penthouse suite. But instead of a usual warm welcome, you're met with judgment. You're looked up and down like you don't belong. The staff, without saying a word, treat you like a criminal. What would you do? Would you stay quiet and walk away? Or would you stand up for yourself, no matter the cost? This isn't just a story of discrimination. It's a story of power, justice, and a woman who turned a humiliating moment into her own victory. This is a true story of Aisha Carter, a black CEO who was kicked out of her own hotel, but just 9 minutes later, flipped the script and fired the entire staff. What happened in those 9 minutes? You won't believe it until you hear it. Stick with me as we dive into this shocking and inspiring moment that shows the strength of one woman's resolve and the power of standing up for what's right. It all started on an ordinary day at the Horizon Grand Hotel in Seattle. Aisha Carter, dressed simply in a black t-shirt and jeans, walked to the hotel's glass doors, carrying nothing but confidence. She wasn't flanked by assistants, nor did she have a designer purse or flashy accessories. Just Aisha, an ordinary woman with extraordinary power. She approached the front desk, where Gregory Vance, the hotel manager, was standing, flanked by 2 clerks, Lauren Hayes and Kevin Patel. Aisha, as calm as ever, made her way to the counter, but what happened next would change everything. Without so much as a greeting, Gregory looked her up and down with cold indifference. His gaze lingered just a little too long, and the look in his eyes told Aisha everything she needed to know. She didn't belong here. Gregory's words followed immediately. That's a very high-tier room. Are you sure you booked the right hotel? Aisha didn't blink. She didn't react. She simply slid her ID and black credit card across the counter. But Gregory, treating her as if she were beneath him, picked up the card with 2 fingers, inspecting it like it might contaminate him. Strange, he muttered. This looks suspicious. It was an insult. It was intentional. And it was just the beginning. Aisha remained quiet. She didn't try to explain herself or argue. Instead, she was about to show Gregory and the entire hotel that the real mistake wasn't hers, but theirs. Gregory's skepticism didn't end there. His voice grew louder. We've seen this scam before, he said. People flash fancy cards, claim they have reservations, and then disappear the second we call the bank. But what Gregory didn't know was that Aisha wasn't just any guest. She wasn't a random person trying to use a fake credit card. Aisha Carter owned the very hotel she was standing in. She wasn't about to let Gregory or anyone else treat her like an outsider in her own establishment. As the situation grew more tense, Lauren, one of the clerks, pressed a button under the counter, and the hotel security was called. We may have an unauthorized guest trying to access one of our premium suites. Possibly fraudulent, Lauren said, her voice crackling through the intercom. It was clear now. Aisha wasn't just being judged. She was being targeted. Kevin, who had been standing off to the side, folded his arms and narrowed his eyes. People try this all the time, he sneered. Fancy cards, fake names. They think we won't check. At that moment, Sophie Lynn, a travel blogger from San Francisco, had already started recording. I'm filming this, Sophie said loud enough for everyone in the lobby to hear. This is being posted. People need to see this. The lobby grew quiet. Aisha felt the weight of the stares, the whispers, the judgment. But she didn't flinch. She stood tall, unbothered, and replied coolly, I'm not here for trouble. I'm here for my room. The words were calm, but there was no mistaking the strength behind them. Aisha wasn't going to let them push her around. But Gregory wasn't done. He leaned forward over the desk, looking down at Aisha with a sneer. Your reservation is canceled, he said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. We don't tolerate deception. You're holding up real guests. Aisha didn't flinch. She didn't even raise an eyebrow. She simply responded, You mean the ones watching this right now? She gestured toward the 2 guests who were filming the entire confrontation. Sophie and Jacob, a young man who had begun streaming live. The crowd around them, once passive, began to pay attention. Some were whispering. Some were glaring at the staff. Aisha could feel the eyes of the people around her shift. She wasn't just a guest now. She was a symbol, standing up against everything Gregory represented. Elena Ruiz, a concierge standing off to the side, was watching the situation closely. Her eyes met Aisha's for a split second, and something passed between them. Recognition, understanding. Elena took a step forward, but was quickly stopped by Gregory's sharp glance. "She doesn't belong here," he snapped, the venom in his voice clear. But Aisha wasn't done. She calmly pulled out her phone, tapped it once, and sent a message. "It's happening," she typed, sending it to her assistant, Nia Thompson, who was sitting in an office 3 blocks away. Almost immediately, Nia responded, "The system's ready." What Gregory didn't realize was that the woman standing in front of him wasn't just any guest. She wasn't a problem to be dealt with. She wasn't someone to be kicked out. Aisha Carter was the CEO of the Horizon Hospitality Group, the owner of this hotel, and she wasn't about to let him or anyone else tarnish her reputation. In the next 9 minutes, she was going to make sure Gregory, Lauren, and Kevin never worked in hospitality again. As the confrontation escalated, Aisha remained steady. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't lash out in anger. She simply continued to stand her ground, waiting for the moment when she would show them exactly who she was, and the consequences of underestimating her. But Gregory, smug and confident, still had no idea what was coming. As Gregory leaned over the desk, his smug expression deepening, Aisha could feel the momentum shift. The words he spoke next, laced with arrogance and disbelief, were about to be his undoing. "You know," Gregory continued, still trying to maintain his grip on the situation, "people like you think you can get away with anything. Flash a fancy card, claim to be someone important, and we're supposed to just accept it. You're not fooling anyone." Aisha's calm voice cut through the growing tension like a knife. "Finish that sentence," she said. The challenge was clear. It was no longer about proving herself to them. It was about standing her ground in the face of an unjust system. But Gregory, too proud to back down, remained silent. The words he had been about to say died in his throat as the realization struck him. This woman wasn't just another guest, and this wasn't just another situation he could handle with his usual disdain. Behind her, the lobby's atmosphere had changed. The gasps were subtle but noticeable. The whispers grew louder, as if people were beginning to realize who Aisha really was. Some of the guests who had been silently watching the drama unfold now leaned in, trying to catch a glimpse of what would happen next. Even Sophie, the travel blogger, had her phone raised higher, her finger hovering over the record button. But Aisha remained unshaken. She didn't need to speak further. She didn't need to argue. Her composure, her silence in the face of provocation, spoke louder than any words ever could. And it was becoming clear to everyone in the lobby what Gregory had misjudged wasn't just Aisha's role as a guest. He had underestimated her power entirely. The next moments were crucial. Gregory, sensing the increasing pressure, tried to regain control. He turned to Kevin Patel, who had been standing off to the side, watching the scene unfold with an air of growing discomfort. "Lock it up," Gregory ordered, as he handed Aisha's credit card over to Kevin with exaggerated care. Kevin didn't hesitate. He took the card and marched toward the small cabinet behind the desk that housed the hotel safe, the cold metal doors waiting to swallow her identity. "Enough of this," Gregory declared loudly, still trying to make himself heard above the murmurs of the crowd. "We're not going to stand here and let you waste our time." But Aisha, unperturbed by his threats, wasn't done. She'd been quiet up until now, but the time for silence was over. She took out her phone once more, her fingers moving deliberately. "Nia," she spoke into the device with controlled authority, "log this moment. I want every second of this interaction documented. Every word, every gesture." On the other end of the line, Aisha's executive assistant, Nia Thompson, responded immediately, her voice calm but precise. "Logged. Systems are ready. I've got all on record." As the words echoed through Aisha's ear, the shift in the lobby's energy was palpable. No longer were the guests merely passive observers. They were starting to take sides. Conversations among the hotel's patrons grew louder. Some of them were whispering about the situation. Some were looking at Aisha in a new light. No longer just a guest being harassed, but a powerful figure standing firm against the system that had failed her. Sophie's phone was still recording, and Jacob's live stream was steadily gaining viewers. The camera caught every moment. The tension in Gregory's eyes, the cold indifference of Lauren, and the shifting expressions of the guests around them. Jacob, now fully aware of the growing spectacle, turned the camera back on himself. We're witnessing something happen in real time. A guest is being harassed by the hotel staff after providing all the proper documentation. The question is, what happens next? Aisha's voice was steady, as calm as it had been all along, but the power behind it couldn't be denied. "Return my card," she said simply, her gaze fixed firmly on Kevin, who was now standing beside the safe, the black card locked inside. The whole lobby held its breath. Kevin hesitated. The once confident air that had surrounded Gregory and his team was crumbling, and for the first time, Kevin seemed unsure. His earlier bravado had vanished. It was clear now he had no idea who Aisha was. More importantly, he had no idea what she was capable of. Behind Aisha, the murmurs of the guests grew louder. One woman, a guest sitting near the lounge chairs, stood up and addressed Gregory directly. "This isn't just bad service," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. "This is discrimination. You're treating her like she doesn't belong here, and we're all watching." The shift was happening. Aisha wasn't alone in this battle. Slowly but surely, the guests began to rally behind her. No one had directly stepped in to challenge the staff yet, but the mood in the room had changed. The balance of power was tipping away from Gregory and his team and toward Aisha. Gregory wasn't ready to admit defeat. His voice cracked, trying to project authority where none remained. "I'll call security," he said, his tone shaking. "If you don't leave voluntarily, we'll have you escorted out. You're trespassing." Aisha's calm smile didn't fade. "Please, go ahead," she said, her voice unwavering. "Call them." The last of Gregory's confidence seemed to drain away in that moment. He turned toward the intercom and slammed his hand down on the button, broadcasting his voice across the hotel. "To all staff, unauthorized individual in the lobby, do not engage. Repeat, do not engage with this guest. Fraud alert." But the moment the announcement ended, a heavy silence followed. Aisha stood completely still, every inch the owner she was. The words from the intercom seemed to echo in the lobby, and yet the room felt eerily still, almost as if the entire space was waiting for something to break the tension. Sophie, still filming, shouted from the side, "She's not a fraud. We're recording everything. How is this happening in a luxury hotel? This is theft." The weight of Sophie's words settled over the room like a blanket, and the guests who had once been passive witnesses to the scene now began to act. One man stepped forward, pointing to the front desk. "That's not how hotels operate," he said firmly. "You're harassing her for no reason." Suddenly, the full extent of Gregory's mistake was clear to everyone. Aisha was no longer a lone guest fighting back. She had become a symbol of everything wrong with the system, and the hotel's patrons were starting to turn on Gregory, Lauren, and Kevin. They weren't just bystanders anymore. They were witnesses to injustice, and now they were standing up for what was right. It wasn't just the guests in the lobby who saw it. As the live stream continued, people from all over the world began to tune in, their eyes fixed on the growing drama. Comments were flooding in. "This is insane," one user typed. "The way they're treating her is unreal." Another comment read, "This is the moment when it all changes." Elena, the concierge who had watched the situation unfold from the sidelines, finally stepped forward, her voice clear and determined. "You can't put your hands on a guest. Her reservation is valid." Gregory, no longer in control of the situation, turned to Elena, his face flushed with anger. "One more word from you and you're gone too," he hissed. But Elena stood her ground. "I won't lie for you. I won't stay silent." And with that, the tipping point was reached. Aisha, watching the whole thing unfold, didn't need to speak again. Her presence alone was enough. The moment had arrived. The staff's authority had evaporated. The crowd had turned, and in just a few more moments, Gregory's entire world was about to come crashing down. The tension in the air could have been cut with a knife. It was a feeling that everyone in the lobby could sense, Something was about to break. Gregory, Lauren, and Kevin stood behind the desk, their faces flushed with a mixture of frustration, disbelief, and anger. But the power had shifted. The guests, once silent observers, were no longer willing to sit back and watch the injustice unfold. Aisha Carter, standing calm and unshaken, had become the focal point of this confrontation, not just as a guest, but as the owner of this hotel. And she wasn't backing down. It was no longer just a matter of a reservation or a misunderstanding. It had become a battle of power, respect, and a refusal to let discrimination and bias stand unchallenged. Gregory, now desperate to regain control, tried once more to intimidate Aisha. "You're wasting everyone's time," he barked, his voice cracking slightly as his earlier confidence faltered. "You're holding up real guests. Just leave. Now." Aisha, still steady, leaned forward slightly, her eyes never leaving his. "You've made a mistake," she said softly, but with such force that everyone in the lobby could feel the weight of her words. "And you're about to regret it." The stillness in the air became almost unbearable. Guests exchanged looks, some nodding in agreement, others whispering under their breath. This was no longer a simple case of bad service. It had evolved into something far more serious. The way Aisha was being treated wasn't just a personal affront. It was a glaring example of how people were often judged and marginalized based on appearances. And Aisha wasn't going to let it slide. Not this time. Elena Ruiz, the concierge who had earlier hesitated but now stood fully by Aisha's side, stepped forward once more. Her voice, though still shaky, held a newfound strength. "I saw her name in the system this morning," Elena said, her eyes locking with Gregory's. "Her reservation is valid. I confirmed it myself." Gregory's expression darkened as Elena spoke, his gaze shifting between her and Aisha, but he still refused to relent. "She's trying to scam us," he spat, the venom in his words more pronounced now. "People like her always think they can play the system." Aisha's gaze never wavered, and for a moment, everything seemed to go silent. The crowd in the lobby, who had been watching this escalate, now held their breath. Some guests were already pulling out their phones, recording every word, every movement, their fingers flying across screens. This wasn't just about Aisha anymore. It was about something much bigger. Sophie Lynn, the travel blogger, wasn't about to let this moment slip by. "I can't believe what I'm seeing," she muttered to her phone's camera. "I'm filming all of this, and people need to know what's happening here." She was no longer just a witness. She was becoming an active part of the growing movement, sharing the story in real time for anyone who cared to watch. And then, the final twist. With every phone raised and every eye on her, Aisha took another step forward, her voice cutting through the tension. "Finish the sentence," she repeated. "You call me a fraud, but I'm not the one who's lying here. I'm not the one who has something to hide." Gregory, his face flushed with embarrassment, opened his mouth to say something, but the words didn't come. He could feel the weight of his mistake pressing down on him. His smirk faltered as the crowd, once indifferent, began to take sides. The balance of power had shifted completely. The guests, who had initially been mere onlookers, were now forming an unspoken alliance. The loyalty was no longer to the hotel or its staff. It was to Aisha, the woman who had stood up against the injustice and had done so with such poise and authority that it left everyone in the room stunned. For a brief moment, Gregory hesitated. It was a crack in his armor, a split second of realization that he had misjudged the situation completely. He turned to Lauren and Kevin, who stood frozen behind the counter, as if waiting for one of them to step in. But no one did. The hotel staff was paralyzed by the truth that was unfolding before them. They had crossed a line, and there was no coming back from it. Aisha, now fully aware of the turning tide, turned her attention back to Kevin, who was still holding her credit card. "Give me my card," she said with a calm finality. "Now." Kevin, who had once been so sure of himself, hesitated again. The crowd was watching, the live stream was growing in numbers, and the pressure from all directions was mounting. He opened his mouth as if to protest, but no words came out. The truth was, he knew what was about to happen. He knew that Aisha wasn't just a guest. and he knew that his actions, his complicity in what had been happening, were about to cost him everything. Aisha's eyes flicked toward the safe behind Kevin, where her card was still locked away. "You were told to steal from me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but filled with undeniable authority. "And now you've got a choice. You can give me my card back, or you can lose your job, your reputation, and your livelihood. The decision is yours." Kevin looked from Aisha to the growing crowd, to the live stream that was now hitting thousands of viewers. His hand shook as he reached toward the safe, the realization hitting him full force. In that moment, he knew that he was standing at the edge of a cliff, and there was no turning back. Behind him, Lauren was still standing, her face pale. She had been silent for the most part, but now her voice broke through. "You don't understand," she said, trying to justify her actions. "Gregory said we had to protect the brand image. People like her." Aisha cut her off before she could finish. "Finish that sentence," she said once more, her voice low and steady. "People like me don't belong here? Is that what you're going to say?" Lauren faltered, her eyes darting nervously between the guests, the staff, and Aisha. The words hung in the air, but no one in the lobby was going to let her finish that sentence. It had already been said loud and clear in the way she had treated Aisha, by assuming that she didn't belong, by treating her with suspicion and disdain. And that's when it happened. Elena, who had stood quietly by until this point, took a step forward. Her eyes locked with Aisha's. She didn't say a word, but the gesture was enough. Aisha's voice rang out clearly. "Gregory, Lauren, Kevin, this is the moment. You are all done here. You don't get to treat people like this. Not here, not anywhere." And with that, the power in the room was undeniable. The lobby, once filled with uncertainty and tension, was now filled with something else. Hope. Hope that the system could change. Hope that when people had the courage to speak out, when they had the strength to stand firm, they could make a difference. And in that moment, Gregory and his team understood what Aisha had known all along. It wasn't just a battle over reservation. It was a battle over respect, equality, and justice. And it was a battle they had lost. The tension in the Horizon Grand Hotel lobby had reached its peak. Guests were no longer just passive witnesses. They were becoming part of something much bigger, something that would forever change the way they saw power, privilege, and accountability. The moment was unfolding in front of their eyes, and every person present could feel that something irreversible was about to happen. Aisha Carter stood at the center of it all, calm, composed, and powerful. She had spent years building her empire, crafting a reputation for being an unwavering leader. But this moment, right here in her own hotel, was where her strength and resolve were truly being tested. Gregory, Lauren, and Kevin stood behind the desk, frozen in disbelief, their previous confidence shattered. Gregory, who had once stood tall and spoke with authority, now seemed small. His face was flushed red, his lips trembling with frustration. He had underestimated Aisha, not only as a guest but as the owner of the hotel he had managed. And now, he was on the verge of losing everything. Aisha's voice cut through the silence that had fallen over the room. "This is it," she said, her tone calm but sharp. "You've made your choices, and now there will be consequences." The guests in the lobby had gone quiet. Some were still filming. Others whispered in disbelief, but all of them were watching closely. No one was moving. No one was leaving. This was a pivotal moment, and every person in that room understood that the story they were witnessing was bigger than just one hotel incident. It was about the fight for respect, for fairness, and for the right to be treated with dignity, no matter your appearance or background. Elena, who had quietly stepped forward earlier to stand by Aisha's side, now spoke up. "I've worked here for 3 years," she said, her voice gaining strength with each word. "And I've seen this pattern before. Every time a guest like Aisha walks in, dressed casually, confident, alone, you treat them like criminals. I've witnessed it firsthand. And I won't stand by and let it happen anymore." Gregory's eyes flashed with anger, but Elena didn't back down. Her words hung in the air, a declaration of truth that no one could ignore. This wasn't just about Aisha. This was about years of mistreatment, years of bias, and years of people in power turning a blind eye to the voices that were being silenced. "Enough!" Gregory barked, his voice cracking. He was desperately trying to regain control, but the more he spoke, the more he revealed his own insecurities. He turned to Lauren and Kevin, clearly trying to rally his team, but it was too late. His words were weak, his authority had crumbled, and everyone in the room knew it. Aisha, never losing her composure, turned her attention back to Kevin, who had been standing nervously near the safe. "Give me my card," she said firmly, her voice leaving no room for negotiation. Kevin, who had been fidgeting with the safe's key, now hesitated. His face was pale, his eyes darting between Aisha and the guests who were watching closely. The moment had become too big for him to handle. The pressure was overwhelming, and he knew the next decision he made would define his future. The silence stretched on. Kevin, clearly unsure of himself, finally reached the key and opened the safe. But Aisha wasn't just getting her card back. This wasn't just about retrieving her property. It was about taking control of a situation that had spiraled out of control, a situation that exposed the systemic issues at the heart of the Horizon Grand Hotel. As Kevin handed Aisha her card, Aisha's voice rang out clearly, not just him, but to everyone in the room. "This is the last time anyone will treat me or anyone else like a criminal in my own hotel. You've made your choices. Now, you'll face the consequences." The tension in the room was palpable. It was as if time had frozen, and everyone was waiting for the next move. Gregory, still trying to save face, stepped forward one last time. "This is illegal," he said, his voice weak. "You can't just fire us. You can't do this." Aisha turned to face him, her gaze unwavering. "Watch me," she said softly. "And when you're out of a job, remember you brought this on yourself." She reached for her phone, tapping a few quick words into the screen. "Nia," she spoke into the device, her voice steady and calm, "log this moment. It's time. Initiate the termination process. Gregory Vance, Lauren Hayes, Kevin Patel. Terminate their access immediately. Freeze their credentials. And log today's incident for the legal audit." The words she spoke were final. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a warning. It was an order. And the moment she pressed send, everything changed. The power had officially shifted. Gregory's access badge, along with Lauren's and Kevin's, buzzed red in real time, signaling their immediate termination. The guests in the lobby watched in stunned silence as the color drained from Gregory, Lauren, and Kevin's faces. Their badges had been locked out of the system, their jobs erased with a single tap on a phone screen. It was over for them. The consequences had come swiftly, and there was no escaping them. Elena, now standing tall beside Aisha, turned to face the crowd. "They don't work here anymore," she said firmly. "They don't represent Horizon Hospitality Group." And with that, the weight of the moment settled over everyone in the room. No one spoke. No one moved. The reality of what had just happened hit like a wave. And it wasn't just the fired staff who were affected. It was everyone present. They had witnessed something powerful, a leader who took control of the situation, who demanded accountability, and who made sure that the people who abused their power faced the consequences of their actions. Gregory, still stunned by the rapid turn of events, tried to make one last attempt to regain control. "This is wrong," he sputtered, his voice trembling with desperation. "You can't just fire us without cause. We're innocent. You can't." But his words were drowned out by the growing sound of clapping. It started slowly at first, a single clap from one guest, then another, and soon the entire lobby erupted in applause. The guests who'd been quietly watching, some filming the entire event, were now standing and applauding Aisha. They weren't applauding for the spectacle. They were applauding for justice. They were applauding for the courage it took to stand up and do what was right. Aisha didn't flinch. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. She had already won. The moment she stepped forward and took control, the game had changed. She wasn't just defending herself. She was making a statement for everyone who had ever been treated unfairly, for everyone who had ever been dismissed or judged because of their appearance, for everyone who had been silenced. Elena, who had stood by Aisha throughout this entire ordeal, now stepped forward and addressed the crowd. "This is just the beginning," she said, her voice strong. "We are implementing new policies. Starting today, we're making sure this never happens again. and we're going to do better. For all our guests. For everyone. And with that, Aisha turned to the hotel's management system, tapping a few commands into her phone. Nia, let's get to work. We're starting a full audit. I want every complaint, every review, every incident logged and addressed. From this moment forward, we're doing things differently. The reform had begun. The lobby was still in shock as the full weight of what had just happened began to sink in. Gregory, Lauren, and Kevin stood there, stunned, unable to fully comprehend the gravity of the situation they were in. For a brief moment, they were trapped in disbelief, trying to grasp the fact that their actions had led to this moment. Gregory, once the confident manager of the Horizon Grand Hotel, now appeared small and powerless. His face was flushed with anger, his mouth moving, but no words coming out. He had tried to dismiss Aisha as just another guest, but in doing so, he had crossed a line that no one could ignore. Aisha, still holding her composure, stood calmly in front of them. Her hands were steady, and her gaze was unwavering. She had given them a chance to rectify their mistake, to show a bit of humility or at least attempt an apology, but they had chosen arrogance instead. Now, they were going to pay the price. The room, once filled with a quiet murmur of judgment, was now full of the sound of Aisha's authority. The guests who had been watching, some with their phones raised, others simply observing, could feel the energy shift. What had started as a confrontation between Aisha and the hotel staff had evolved into something larger, a moment of justice, a clear demonstration of power shifting from those who had once held it over others to those who had been marginalized. Gregory's voice cracked as he tried to salvage some semblance of control. "This is illegal," he muttered. "You can't just fire us. You can't do this. This isn't how things work." But his words held no weight. Aisha had already taken charge, and now the consequences were unfolding in real time. Her fingers tapped steadily on her phone as she issued the order. "Nia," she said firmly into the device, "log this moment. It's time. Initiate the termination process. Gregory Vance, Lauren Hayes, Kevin Patel, terminate their access immediately. Freeze their credentials, and log today's incident for the legal audit." It was a simple, direct statement, and as Aisha pressed send, the reality of the situation hit harder than anything Gregory could have expected. The access badges of the 3 staff members buzzed red, signaling their immediate termination. The moment had arrived, and there was no going back. The silence in the lobby deepened. The reality of what was unfolding hit like a thunderclap. Aisha had just done something no one had expected. She hadn't just stood up for herself. She had dismantled the power structure that had allowed Gregory, Lauren, and Kevin to treat her and possibly others with disdain and discrimination. She had done so with dignity and poise, making it clear that there would be no more tolerance for such behavior. Gregory, still reeling, turned toward Lauren and Kevin, his eyes filled with disbelief. "We're done," he muttered under his breath. There was no denying it now. His tenure, his authority, and his ability to lead had evaporated in front of his eyes, and it was all because he had misjudged Aisha. Aisha's calm demeanor never faltered. She took a moment to survey the scene, the room filled with silent witnesses to this pivotal moment. The guests, who had once been uncertain, now looked on with a sense of awe. The applause had started quietly. A few claps at first, then a steady crescendo as more and more people began to show their approval. Aisha didn't need their applause, but it was a powerful signal. The world around her was watching, and they were acknowledging the change she had just created. The system that had been in place for so long had just been upended, and those who had once held power were now on the receiving end of consequences. Elena Ruiz, standing by Aisha's side, now spoke up. Her voice was steady, no longer wavering with uncertainty. "This is just the beginning," she said. "We are implementing new policies starting today. We're making sure that this never happens again. We're going to do better. For all our guests. For everyone." The guests in the lobby nodded, some even applauding again. They had witnessed something important. Not just a moment of personal victory for Aisha, but a moment of collective change. They were seeing firsthand what it meant to stand up for what's right, to demand accountability, and to take action when the system had failed. Aisha, taking a step forward, turned back to the management system on her phone. "Nia, let's get to work. We're starting a full audit. I want every complaint, every review, every incident logged and addressed. From this moment forward, we're doing things differently. Her words were clear, firm, and full of purpose. There would be no more tolerance for discrimination, no more silence when things went wrong. Aisha had made it clear that she would hold herself and her company to a higher standard. And with that declaration, the wheels of change were set in motion. As the day wore on, the once quiet lobby of the Horizon Grand Hotel had transformed. What had begun as a confrontation had turned into something far more significant. It wasn't just about Aisha taking control of her hotel. It was about her reclaiming the dignity that had been denied to her. It was about ensuring that no one, regardless of their appearance or background, would ever be treated with the same disregard again. The fired staff, once certain of their position, were now at the mercy of a world that had outgrown their outdated ideas. The guests who had been mere onlookers were now witnesses to a change they would not forget. And as Aisha walked through the lobby, her black card safely back in her hand, she knew that the work was far from over. This was only the beginning. The aftermath of that pivotal moment spread throughout the Horizon Grand Hotel like wildfire. The guests who had witnessed the confrontation and the immediate fallout shared their experiences, both in person and through social media, with a level of passion and urgency that was impossible to ignore. As the viral video of Aisha Carter taking control of the situation began to gain traction, the entire hotel, once a symbol of luxury and exclusivity, now carried a new meaning. The hotel was no longer just a business. It had become a living, breathing example of justice being served, of systemic abuse being confronted head-on. In the days that followed, the building buzzed with the energy of change. Aisha wasn't one to rest on her laurels, not even for a second. She immediately began implementing her plan for reform. She knew that taking down the 3 employees who had treated her unjustly was only the beginning. The changes had to be far-reaching, not just a temporary fix or a one-time gesture. Aisha's vision was clear. What happened in the Horizon Grand Hotel that day was just a glimpse of the broader transformation she wanted to lead within her company, across all her properties. With a single phone call, Aisha initiated a complete audit of the hotel's guest service practices. Every complaint, every accusation, every inappropriate interaction that had been swept under the rug for years would now be reviewed and addressed. She didn't trust the old systems, the same ones that had allowed Gregory, Lauren, and Kevin to operate unchecked for so long. She brought in an independent firm to assess not only the Horizon Grand Hotel, but all 57 properties under the Horizon Hospitality Group's umbrella. She knew that the problem wasn't isolated to one location. It was systemic. Meanwhile, Aisha's assistant, Nia, worked tirelessly to ensure the reform process was seamless and swift. She sent out internal memos to the entire staff, making sure they were aware of the changes that were coming. The tone of those memos wasn't just about new policies. It was about accountability, transparency, and, most importantly, respect. Aisha was making it clear. The days of ignoring complaints and dismissing guests because of their appearance were over. From now on, Horizon Hospitality would lead by example, ensuring that every single guest felt welcome and respected. But Aisha didn't just focus on punishing the wrongdoers. She wanted to build something better, something sustainable. She knew that for true change to take root, it had to come from within. Elena Ruiz, the concierge who had stood by Aisha's side during the confrontation and who had spoken out against the biased behavior of the staff, was promoted to general manager of the Horizon Grand Hotel. Aisha had seen Elena's courage firsthand, and she knew Elena had what it took to lead the hotel with integrity and fairness. This wasn't just a reward for standing up in the heat of the moment. It was a recognition of Elena's values and leadership potential. Aisha believed that by empowering people like Elena, she could create a culture of honesty, respect, and inclusivity throughout the company. While Elena was stepping into her new role, Aisha spent her time addressing the media. Interviews, statements, and press releases were carefully crafted to tell the full story of what happened at Horizon Grand. The media was hungry for more, and Aisha knew this was an opportunity not just to defend herself, but to amplify her message of justice. She didn't shy away from the attention. She embraced it, making it clear that what had happened to her wasn't a one-off event. It was a wake-up call for an entire industry that had long been complicit in its own biases. But as the media attention grew, so did the support. People were watching and they were inspired. Aisha received messages from people across the country, guests who had been mistreated in hotels, employees who had experienced similar discrimination, and people who simply felt a sense of empowerment after seeing Aisha take control of her own narrative. It wasn't just about her hotel. It was about the larger, systemic issues that people of color, women, and marginalized groups faced every day. The story was bigger than Aisha, bigger than Horizon Grand. It was about a society that was starting to hold institutions accountable for the way they treated people. And Aisha had just become a symbol of that change. But she knew that the real work was in the details. The reform had to go beyond surface-level gestures. It had to be built into the very culture of the company. Aisha knew that the transformation would take time, but she was patient. She didn't expect miracles overnight, but she did expect progress. And that progress started with making sure that every single staff member, from the front desk clerks to the executive team, underwent a full recertification process in customer service, anti-bias training, and leadership. No one would be exempt, no matter their position or tenure. Aisha also instituted a new set of checks and balances. Every guest complaint, every review, and every issue raised by employees would now be tracked and resolved in real time. There would be no more ignoring problems, no more brushing things under the rug. Horizon Hospitality would become a company where the voices of all its guests and its employees were heard and respected. This wasn't about PR or damage control. This was about building a new foundation based on fairness, dignity, and inclusion. As Aisha continued to make her rounds in the corporate offices, speaking with various departments and ensuring that the changes were being implemented, she also made sure to personally reach out to guests who had been at Horizon Grand during that fateful day. She sent personalized letters of thanks, acknowledging the role they had played in supporting her and standing up for what was right. She wanted them to know that their actions, filming, speaking out, and simply not turning away, had made a difference. Their support had not gone unnoticed. The ripple effect of what happened in the lobby of Horizon Grand was spreading far beyond the hotel walls. Aisha was changing the narrative. She wasn't just the CEO of a hotel chain. She was a leader who had shown the world that power could be used for good. And while the fired staff members, Gregory, Lauren, and Kevin, had their own personal consequences to face, the truth was that the biggest change was happening within the company itself. The Horizon Grand Hotel would never be the same, and neither would Aisha's legacy. In the weeks that followed the showdown at the Horizon Grand Hotel, the atmosphere within the company began to shift. The changes that Aisha Carter had set in motion were not just about firing a few employees or making a public statement. They were about rethinking the very foundation of Horizon Hospitality Group. Aisha had built her empire from the ground up, but this moment felt different. This was more than business as usual. It was about creating something that would outlast her, something that would leave a legacy of true equity, fairness, and respect. The future of the company was no longer just about profit margins and luxury. It was about transforming the entire culture to reflect the values Aisha had fought for. Elena Ruiz, now general manager of the Horizon Grand Hotel, was the face of this transformation. She was a leader who understood that change couldn't just be top-down. It had to start with the people on the ground, the ones who interacted with guests every day. Elena dove into her new role with passion and resolve, determined to lead by example and create a space where all guests, regardless of background, felt valued and respected. Under her leadership, the Horizon Grand began implementing the new training protocols that Aisha had promised. Every employee, from housekeeping to management, was required to undergo comprehensive anti-bias training, customer service recertification, and leadership development. The new policies were clear. There was zero tolerance for discrimination in any form. Elena worked closely with the training teams to ensure that the lessons weren't just theoretical but practical. The hotel staff was trained on how to deal with diverse guests, how to spot biases in themselves and others, and how to create an environment where everyone, regardless of appearance or socioeconomic status, felt welcomed and valued. It wasn't easy. There were moments of resistance, moments when some staff members questioned the necessity of the changes. But Elena didn't waver. She knew that this was about more than just appeasing guests. It was about creating a culture of inclusion that would ripple through every aspect of Horizon Hospitality. Meanwhile, Aisha was busy behind the scenes, overseeing the audit of Horizon Hospitality's other properties. She had insisted that the audit be transparent and thorough, with independent investigators looking at every complaint, every issue, and every report of discriminatory behavior or poor customer service. It wasn't just about dealing with the present. It was about confronting the past. Aisha wanted to know how deep the problems ran and to what extent bias and mistreatment had been allowed to continue unchecked. She also knew that this kind of audit couldn't just be a one-time event. It had to become a permanent fixture in the company's culture, a way to ensure that every guest experience was treated as valuable and valid. The findings of the audit were eye-opening. In some properties, staff had been improperly trained or simply ignored complaints from guests who didn't fit the typical profile of a high-end customer. There were cases where complaints were buried, where bias was allowed to slide under the radar, and where guests, often people of color or those from marginalized communities, were made to feel less than. But there was something else that stood out to Aisha. There were also stories of employees who had quietly stood up for their guests, even when it wasn't popular. These employees were the unsung heroes, the ones who hadn't been afraid to challenge the status quo. Aisha made sure they were recognized, and many of them were given the opportunity for advancement within the company. As the audit wrapped up, Aisha's decision to take immediate, decisive action became even clearer. She implemented company-wide policy changes, making a requirement that every Horizon Hospitality employee, from the front desk to the executive team, take part in quarterly diversity and inclusion training. There would be no exceptions. This wasn't just about one bad day at one hotel. This was about an entire industry that needed a change, and Aisha was going to make sure Horizon Hospitality led that charge. But Aisha's reforms didn't stop at just training and policy changes. She wanted to ensure that the voices of those who had been marginalized were heard, not just in her company, but in the hospitality industry as a whole. To that end, she launched a new initiative within Horizon Hospitality, the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council. The council was made up of employees from every level of the company, staff members who had experienced bias, who had witnessed discrimination, or who had simply felt that something was wrong. They would be the ones responsible for advising Aisha and the leadership team on how to improve the company's culture and ensure that it remained inclusive and fair. It was an ambitious move, but Aisha was committed to creating a company that truly reflected her values. The media continued to cover Aisha's efforts, and the story of her stand at the Horizon Grand Hotel became an inspiration to many. Other companies in the hospitality industry took notice of the sweeping changes she was making and began to follow suit. Aisha had opened a door that couldn't be closed again. She wasn't just changing her company. She was helping to shape an industry. And as more people learned about the transformation she was leading at Horizon Hospitality, the demand for change in other industries grew louder as well. Aisha became a voice for those who had long been silenced, a champion for fairness, and a symbol of what could happen when power was used to uplift rather than to control. As for the Horizon Grand Hotel, the transformation under Elena's leadership was nothing short of remarkable. The hotel, once known for its exclusivity and its cold, judgmental atmosphere, had become a model of hospitality, one where every guest was treated with the same level of respect, regardless of how they looked, how much money they had, or where they came from. The reviews began to reflect the changes that had been made. Guests who had once been turned away or treated poorly now returned, eager to experience the new Horizon Grand for themselves. And the staff, once hesitant about the changes, began to see the benefits. They realized that treating every guest with respect wasn't just good for business. It was the right thing to do. But Aisha knew that there was still much work to be done. The changes had been monumental, but they were just the beginning. She had set the foundation, but now it was time to build on it. The company was changing, but so was the world around it. Aisha had set out to make a difference, not just in her own company, but in the entire hospitality industry, and perhaps beyond. As she sat in her office one evening, looking out over the city of Seattle, Aisha smiled. She had come a long way from the woman who had been dismissed at the front desk of a hotel in Atlanta all those years ago. She had built an empire, yes, but more than that, she had built a legacy of fairness, inclusion, and justice. And in that moment, Aisha Carter knew she had only just begun. As Aisha sat back in her office, reflecting on the journey she had undertaken, the enormity of the transformation was becoming clear. What had started as a personal confrontation in a hotel lobby had evolved into a revolution. Aisha had not only reclaimed control of her hotel, but she had also catalyzed a change that rippled across the hospitality industry. She knew this was just the beginning, but the foundation was solid. The work she had done had far-reaching implications. Changes that would echo in boardrooms, in lobbies, and in the way businesses operated for years to come. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of her phone buzzing on the desk. It was a message from Nia, her assistant. The first quarterly diversity and inclusion report just came in. The training sessions are working. Employee engagement is at an all-time high, and guest satisfaction is up across the board. Aisha smiled, but there was no time to rest. The momentum was building, and it had to be maintained. The real test was in the follow-through. The quarterly reports were a sign of progress, but the ultimate measure of success would be in the long-term changes she could instill in the company's culture. She quickly skimmed through the report and nodded approvingly. Horizon Hospitality was beginning to see the fruits of its labor. Guests were more satisfied, and staff turnover was lower than it had been in years. But Aisha wasn't one to settle for good enough. She had a vision, and she was determined to see it through. Aisha knew that systemic change wouldn't happen overnight. While the hotel's new policies had already begun to shift the atmosphere, it would take time for the entire organization to fully embrace the new values. Horizon Hospitality wasn't just implementing a set of rules. It was fundamentally changing the way they approached hospitality. Every aspect of their business needed to reflect their commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. The next step in her plan was to roll out the new guest feedback system. No longer would complaints be ignored or swept under the rug. Guests could now submit anonymous feedback, which would be reviewed and addressed by a dedicated team. Every department would be held accountable. Aisha knew that transparency was key, and the new system would allow for that. Guests could now expect a response within 24 hours, no matter the size of the issue. Aisha had also made a point to reach out personally to the employees at other Horizon Hospitality properties. The message was clear. Change was coming, and it wasn't optional. She hosted a series of town halls where employees could ask questions, share concerns, and learn more about the new direction the company was headed in. It was important to Aisha that everyone in her company understood the purpose behind the changes and why they were necessary. She made sure to emphasize that this was about more than just fixing problems. It was about creating a company that truly reflected the world around it. The town halls were a huge success. Employees, some of whom had been skeptical about the changes, now saw the bigger picture. They began to understand that this wasn't just about making the hotel industry look good. It was about doing right by the people who worked there, the people who stayed there, and the community at large. One of the most impactful moments in the town halls came when a former employee of the Horizon Grand Hotel shared her story. She had been mistreated at the hotel years ago, and she had been too afraid to speak up at the time. But after seeing the changes Aisha was making, she decided to share her experience. It was a powerful moment of healing, not just for her, but for everyone in the room. Aisha listened intently, offering her support and gratitude for the woman's courage. It was a reminder that the work they were doing went beyond policies and procedures. It was about restoring dignity to those who had been silenced for too long. As the weeks passed, the cultural shift within Horizon Hospitality grew more evident. The hotel's new policies were starting to gain traction in the industry. Aisha was invited to speak at conferences and panels, where she shared her journey and vision for the future. Her story of resilience, leadership, and transformation resonated with people from all walks of life. What had started as an act of defiance in a lobby of a hotel was now a call to action for leaders in every industry to rethink the way they operated. The media coverage continued, but now it wasn't just about the scandal at the Horizon Grand Hotel. The story had evolved into one of hope, progress, and redemption. Aisha's name became synonymous with leadership that cared about people, not just profits. She was celebrated for her ability to turn a negative experience into a positive force for change. She became a sought-after speaker, an advocate for diversity and inclusion, and a role model for others who wanted to make a difference. But Aisha wasn't interested in being a symbol. She wasn't interested in accolades. Her mission was clear. She wanted to ensure that the change she had started was sustainable. She wanted Horizon Hospitality to continue to lead the way in hospitality, not just in the U.S., but across the globe. She knew that real change required ongoing effort, constant vigilance, and a willingness to listen, learn, and adapt. And so she kept pushing. Every decision she made, every policy she implemented, was aimed at building a company that was not only successful, but truly fair. She had created a new standard for what hospitality could look like, one where respect, inclusivity, and integrity weren't just buzzwords, but the foundation upon which everything else was built. The final chapter in the Horizon Grand story wasn't about the fall of one man or the dismissal of a few employees. It was about the rise of a new vision. It was about taking a stand, facing adversity, and choosing to do the right thing. Aisha Carter had proven that even in a world that sometimes felt impossible to change, it was possible to shift the course of an entire industry with one act of courage. Aisha leaned back in her chair, feeling a sense of fulfillment wash over her. It hadn't been easy, and the road ahead was still long, but she knew that what had started with her quiet determination in a hotel lobby had transformed into something far bigger than she had ever imagined. The world was watching. The changes were happening. And Horizon Hospitality was leading the way. As Aisha Carter looked out over the city, she couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. The journey from that first moment of humiliation in the Horizon Grand Hotel lobby to this point had been long and hard, but it had also been transformative. She had faced down an unjust system, stood firm in the face of adversity, and turned a moment of personal defeat into a revolution. And in doing so, she had created a ripple effect that was changing not only her hotel, but the entire industry. Her leadership had been tested in ways she hadn't anticipated. The anger she'd felt that day when she was dismissed had turned into a driving force for change. Every decision she made after that moment had been a direct challenge to the biases and inequalities she'd experienced. And now Horizon Hospitality was a shining example of what was possible when a company took responsibility for its actions and committed to real transformation. As the months went by, the success of her reform initiatives became undeniable. The Horizon Grand Hotel, under Elena's leadership, was thriving. Guests were returning in droves, eager to experience the newly revamped hotel that now valued all its guests, regardless of appearance or background. And the feedback from staff was overwhelmingly positive. No longer was the environment toxic or biased. Instead, it was one of inclusivity, respect, and accountability. Employees were proud to work at Horizon, and the guest satisfaction scores reflected that. The changes that Aisha had implemented at the Horizon Grand Hotel were only the beginning. Horizon Hospitality Group now stood as an example of how to run a successful business while upholding the values of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Other companies within the hospitality industry were starting to take note, with some even reaching out to Aisha for guidance. She had become a sought-after speaker at industry conferences, sharing her story of leadership, courage, and systemic change. But for Aisha, the work was never done. She continued to push for more change, more accountability, and more growth. Horizon Hospitality wasn't just a business. It was a platform for something bigger. The company was now a place where the voices of all guests, especially those who had been marginalized, were heard and respected. And it was also a place where employees could thrive, knowing they were supported and valued. Aisha knew the fight for justice and equality wasn't over. She knew that real change took time and that there would always be more work to be done. But she had proven that even in the face of personal humiliation, one person, armed with the right values and a commitment of fairness, could take on an entire system and win. As Aisha stood up from her desk, looking out over the hotel lobby that had been transformed under her leadership, she thought about the journey. What started as a small, personal victory had turned into something much larger. It was a victory for everyone who had ever been overlooked, ignored, or discriminated against. It was a testament to the power of one woman who had refused to be silenced. Aisha Carter had rewritten the rules, not just for her hotel, but for the entire industry. She had proven that standing up for what's right could create a lasting legacy, a legacy that would inspire future generations of leaders to stand tall, speak out, and demand change. And as the hotel door swung open, welcoming guests from all walks of life, Aisha smiled. She had reclaimed what was hers. And now, the world was watching.